Welcome to Effective People, your HR transformation partner.
Hello and welcome to the Planning Your Compensation and Bonus Cycle webinar by Effective People. Today's webinar will go over some tips and best practices for using SAP SuccessFactors Compensation Management, Variable Pay, and Reward and Recognition. We have a jam-packed agenda for today's webinar to help you and your organisation get set for your 2025. There will be just a quick introduction from ourselves before heading into the main content, starting with preparation activities, before you go into launching and running your compensation campaigns. Then an update on reporting and some really nice improvements that have been made into the solution. And then also some simple recommendations for all of you, followed by the Q&A. My name is Martin Kircher, and I'm from Effective People, and I will be hosting today's webinar. I have our Total Awards lead, Phil McGovern, to lead the webinar, and I will let Phil introduce himself in just a minute. For those who are not aware of Effective People, we're an SAP partner and expert for SAP SuccessFactors. We have over 20 years experience implementing, supporting, and helping our customers discover the value of SAP SuccessFactors. With this experience, we like to ensure that our customers are kept up to date with current innovation, as well as giving simple hints and tips to get the best out of their SuccessFactors solution. I'm now going to hand over to Phil to lead the discussion.
Thanks, Martin. As Martin mentioned, my name is Phil McGovern. I am the head of Total Rewards here at Effective People. I have been in the SuccessFactors compensation space for quite a long time. I actually started with SAP in 2010, and I joined Effective People recently, and I hope to give you all today a good idea of what it takes to actually go ahead and get ready for your next compensation cycle. It all starts off with the beginning. So we start with the groundwork, and this is the preparation activities that set you up for success. Okay? Think of this as behind the scenes work, getting ready for a big stage production. You wouldn't start cooking a gourmet meal without preparing all the ingredients ahead of time. So we want to actually go through the key tasks that you need to be able to do before you actually launch the forms out into the wild. Okay, we'll cover everything from gathering the market data and reviewing your compensation philosophy to updating your timelines and aligning them with your leadership. It might seem like a lot, but trust me, it's really straightforward, and we'll get through it, and it'll make a world of difference when you make your do the process. So let's actually get ready to go through the process. Okay. The main thing to consider is that your next compensation cycle starts immediately after the current one ends. You don't want to wait 6 months until we decide to start going, oh, let's get ready for compensation. I often joke when I'm doing compensation implementations that comp people really are only active 3 months out of the year, and the other 9 months they just sit around waiting for the comp cycles to start. And you know that's not true, and I know that's not true, but it's key to make sure that you start right when the next one ends. When you've going through your compensation cycle, make sure you're maintaining a list of all the things that work and don't work, any changes that you want to make when you say, oh, well, next year we should do that. That needs to be being maintained while you're doing your cycle. Right after the cycle, make sure you do a lessons learned. Make sure and to see what things it is that you need to get ready for the next year. Then you're going to go through and look to see if there's any changes in your compensation philosophy. Okay, any changes of how you want to reward people, but also start looking at things like what has changed with SuccessFactors? What enhancements can we take advantage of? Look at those. We also want to make sure that when we get time to doing the compensation process, that we're doing the changes to a new template. This is where the compensation admin comes into play, and you may be engaged with a partner. Hopefully it's Effective People, but maybe somebody else. But this is where you actually are doing the actual changes. And then before you actually launch the forms, you've got to test. Everybody tests. So to be successful, you need to be able to test. We've got some test scripts you can do. SAP provides some test scripts, and make sure that you do that. So if we look at steps 1, 2, 3, 4, that basically is covering most of the year. So let's say we end the compensation process in the springtime. We plan over the summer. Configuring starts in the autumn, and the testing and migration starts right before you actually launch the process. That's, of course, assuming you do a wintertime compensation review. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today in this workshop is mainly steps 3 and 4. I can't tell you how to change your philosophy. That's up to you. What I can do is give you advice on how best to configure your system and things you need to be aware of to get your system ready for the next year. That's what we're going to concentrate mainly in the beginning part of this webinar is step 3 of this process, the configuration items you need to be careful and take care of before you're ready to launch. And we'll cover both compensation, salary planning, variable pay, and bonus and reward and recognition. We will touch briefly on the testing and migration aspect of things, but mainly we'll be talking about step 3 of this process. And so this is the things that you need to be aware of as far as technically goes before you're ready for your next process. Okay, the very first step is before we get on to anything else is that you actually need to clone your worksheet. And it's actually in the compensation home, there is a button to copy a worksheet. And in that process, that's when you actually make your new template. You should be aware by now that when you should have a template per cycle. You don't reuse the same template over and over again. You've got a template, you've got the 2024, the 2025, the 2026, 2027, and so forth. So you use that copy template process, and that actually will go ahead and get ready for the next cycle. So that's the very first step. There are some dates in there. The key one being the new effective date with the Employee Central integration. But then also you need to be aware of the lookup tables. The lookup tables, you give them all new names. Typically, we suggest that you start each lookup table with a 2020X, which actually for each new year. Okay, after that, you're going to be looking at your route maps. Also, you can tell by my American accent. I live in the UK, but I do actually say route, but you may actually hear me say route because it varies East Coast, West Coast of the United States, and I grew up on both parts. So I actually interchangeably say route and route, but you want to make sure your route maps get updated to have the dates. You may not actually have the due dates in there, which means that you don't actually need to update route maps. So you can actually reuse those if you want to, but typically you will have a due date in there that does need to be updated. Your lookup tables, as I mentioned, the names get changed when you do the copy template process, but they actually don't create the actual lookup table. So if you were launching you update the reference when you copy the template, it doesn't actually create 2025 budget table. You actually need to go to the lookup aspect of the admin pages, upload a template, upload a table into that area and actually provide new data. Make sure that you're always referencing those and you make a list when you do the duplication process so you know which new tables you need to add. Okay, next you're looking at eligibility rules. Eligibility rules may or may not be actually duplicated. When you do the copy template, I actually pretend not to do them because it's easier to do them manually because you only need to update and create new eligibility rules if the eligibility rule has a date aspect of it. They typically do. So things like, we only want to include employees that were hired after the 1st of October, for example. You need to update that so you change the year from 2024 to 2025 and so forth. However, you may be having rules that don't have any date criteria at all. If you do have that, then there's no reason to actually create new rules. Another thing that I've seen clients do is they actually create new versions of the rule by adding a new effective date to it. So typically you start with an effective date of the 1st of January 1900, but then the next rule may be 2nd of January 1900, and the 3rd of January 1900. So you're always using the same rule, but you're just updating the effective date so you have a new version of the rule. That actually may make things a little easier for you to maintain. There are some dates within the template process. The effective date does actually get updated when you do the copy, but it doesn't update the publish dates. So you may actually need to go into the EC integration page and update the dates by which things are published. So make sure the date gets updated there because we don't want to backdate any parameters when they get published. We want to make sure that the salary range or the EC integration date are being updated. We're finding most clients nowadays have the EC integration enabled, which means that there's a date there that they need to make sure that we're pulling the salary ranges as of a certain date. So that's, again, another date that needs to be reviewed to make sure we've updated it for the new year. If you're not using the EC integration for pay ranges, you've got a new salary table that you need to upload, and then you need to reference that in your configuration of your new template. Guidelines, they get duplicated when you duplicated the template, but not always. Oftentimes, the guidelines need to be adjusted because usually guidelines are based upon budgets. So if a budget in a certain country changes, then therefore the guidelines in that country need to be changed. But not all guidelines need to be updated. Some guidelines are there, for example, just to enable the force comment functionality. So you may not need to update a guideline where basically it's just need to make sure that it's not zero. Currency conversion, I think that doesn't need any explanation. We need to have a new currency conversion table each year. Again, if you update and add a new currency conversion table, you need to reference it in the template. And this is actually a little bit tricky. Here's a little configuration tip. When you add if you're in a configuration of a worksheet and then you use the actions for all plans dropdown, you will be able to add a new currency conversion table, but you're not able to actually reference it until you actually reload the browser, because the list of possible tables is loaded when you open up the template. So you actually need to reopen up the template by reloading the browser to actually get it to appear in the dropdown. That's actually a trick that catches people out a lot of times, and so you make sure that you do reload the browser just to make sure that you see that new currency conversion table in that drop-down list. Also, if you are doing a pay-for-performance scenario where you do have performance as a feed into the compensation process, you do need to make sure you change that. This is relevant to both compensation and variable pay. So you may be updating both two different templates. If you've got total compensation, you might have to update it in two different places. So you may actually need to be aware that you're no longer using the 2023 performance form, you're now using the 2024 performance form, or 2025, depending on when you use it, etc. Make sure you go ahead and duplicate the configuration that you've got in your current system. For the compensation module, it's just a matter of picking the new form from the big dropdown, but for variable pay, you actually need to re-add as if from scratch the new performance forms. So make sure you understand the settings in the variable pay list, but where it says what particular ratings we're pulling, whether it's completed forms or not completed forms, calculated or overall ratings, and so forth. Again, if you've got any questions with any of this, doing it yourself, even not just the ratings, but any of these topics, please feel free to reach out to Effective People. If you've got a support contract, it's as easy as raising a ticket. If not, just call us and we'll be able to help you out. Okay, budgets. Again, this is sort of, usually it's from a lookup table that you've updated when we talked about the lookup tables updates, but not always budgets come from lookup tables. Sometimes the budgets are actually hard-coded with a certain number. So you need to be aware of actually how the budgets are done. And so to make sure you understand your configuration, make sure you look at your workbook. And again, if you've got any problems with this, give us a ring, and we'll help you out and try to get you sorted so you're able to do this from now on. Okay, as I said, oftentimes it's a lookup table, but it's not always. You can't be guaranteed that. Statements, this is where things get interesting. We're talking about what's changed in the last sort of year of SuccessFactors compensation. Statements have come a long way, but you still need to create a new one every year. So you go ahead and use the Save As function. You can see it there in the screenshot in the top left-hand corner of the statement. You open up your existing one, use the Save As and give it a new name. Maybe it's the 2025, 2026 statements, and then you make the changes. Be particularly cautious about looking at dates inside of the text. Also in the headers, we actually just had a ticket from a client the other day where they didn't realize they put the wrong date. They missed updating a date in a column header on the right-hand side. And so we needed to go in there help them out and do that. So that's, again, one of these little tiny things that you might not think that's important, but it lends itself to the quality of the review as a whole. So make sure you spend the time doing the details now, and therefore you can look at things and be more cautious. Okay, the last couple things we're looking at field-based permissions. Those typically don't change, but just review them. That's why I put the word review rather than, I said just check rather than update, because there's not always going to be a change. Just make sure they're still valid. Reporting, this is something we're going to touch on a little bit later. But reporting is one of those things that you do need to make sure that the new template is feeding into an existing report. So you're either going to clone an existing report, but that doesn't change what template is referenced. You still need to go into the report. Reports are a little bit tricky. The report stories, especially, it's not as easy as just clicking and just choosing a new field from a drop-down. Hopefully, report stories, you've got the training there. But again, this is an area, if you are a little bit unsure, you can contact us and we'll, again, help you out. Okay. Now, the last two things, we've got the updating of scheduled jobs. So you probably have some scheduled jobs that are running maybe once or twice a day in the background to make sure that the latest data flows from Employee Central into the compensation worksheets. Eligibility changes are being affected as employees leave, they're removed from the system and so forth. There is usually what's called a background job that is running, that is doing this for you several times a day. But unfortunately, as of right now, this is February 2025, it's not possible to actually do this through the UI, which means it does need provisioning access. So as partners access and able to update these background jobs. I put for now because it's one of those things that I know is on the eventualities list to be accessed through the UI. The next release has these background jobs for performance and goals being accessed through the UI. And I think it's the release after that, but this is probably early 2026 where we're actually going to be able to access these things through the UI. But for now, to manage these scheduled jobs and create new ones, you need to go through provisioning, which does mean partner support. When we talk about variable pay specifically, there are the core fields for variable pay that need to be updated. When you clone variable pay, you are asked if you want to clone the bonus business goals and bonus plans that you used in your existing plan. And often that is okay to do that. But you usually don't want to clone your employee history. You actually need to load that from your existing Employee Central data or upload it depending on your configuration. However, in the business goals, you're going to need to eventually upload new results. But in my experience, very rarely do the business goals repeat themselves from one year to the next. Every company likes to do their structural changes and puts forth new plans in place to actually decide what is the direction that the company is going, and so they may be concentrating on different things from year to year. So typically, you're going to have new business goals, and so that means you're going to have to update the business goals file, the bonus, and as well as the business goal weights file, which that means how those business goals apply to the individual bonus plans. Again, variable pay tends to be a little more complex than compensation. And again, if you've got any problems, let us know and we'll help you out. Okay. Now, lastly, we want to talk a little bit about reward and recognition. Reward and recognition is in my mind, underused part of the compensation suite that's available to you in the tool. It is included in your compensation license. It isn't a separate license, so it is something that is available to you. It's just a matter of setting it up. And it is designed to be entirely administrated and set up by the client. It's not something that necessarily is going to require a whole lot of support from a partner. As such, it is important that you go through and actually understand it, and you do need to make a different plan per year. We're more than happy to help you out, but it usually is a very small engagement to get it started if you are interested into that process. The reward and recognition is going through a UI change as far as the administration screens. So the screen you see on here is what it looks like right now, again, February 2025. But if it is due, and we'll talk about that in the roadmap, that it is due for refresh coming up soon. So some of the screenshots may not be relevant, but there is no cloning process for reward and recognition. You do need to go in and create a new one from scratch. And so what I did is put in here this list of the items that you are most likely to change. It may be as simple as updating the start and end date of the plan. So you actually do all exactly the same configuration options, and all you change is the start and end date. However, there is an eligibility rule that runs in the background that may actually need to be updated. You may need to change that to be the only people that are involved that can be eligible for the spot awards are people hired after a certain date. So again, that date would need to change in the eligibility. Okay, so are there any questions, Martin, about all those things I raced through in the configuration options?
There is nothing as yet, but I'm sure people will ask questions when appropriate.
Okay, well, this goes.
Thank you for getting through that so quickly.
Easy it is to do. Okay, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we're talking mainly about that step 1, 2, 3, and 4. We're actually now moving on from step 3 into step 4. So you've set up your system. So you think you've done all the changes that I just talked about. Now it's time, what do we do next? Okay, so this is where we talk about testing and migration and before you're preparing for production. So we want to do all of these changes in our dev instance. Dev or QA, clients have different names for it, but we've got a separate instance from our production instance. You want to make sure you're doing all your changes in there. We all know that it's best practice not to do changes directly in production. We want to make sure they get tested first, but we all know practicality. Some things may have been changed in production. So we want to make sure that we're operating on the most current version of each one of our templates. That may require a instance refresh from production back into our development instance. That's something you can discuss with your partner, but we want to make sure we're doing all these changes in our dev system. So we want to make sure we do at least one full end-to-end test with our entire population. We want to make there are test plans that are available. We have some examples that we can share with you. There are some SAP samples that we have used. Ours are just based upon the SAP ones. The SAP one's probably the better source, but we will not be creating test scripts for you. Test scripts are up to your responsibility. Make sure that they are, because you understand your business better than anybody. Make sure you're loading all the correct data. We've talked about different places where that data gets loaded. You're importing the employee data if needed. If not, if you're using Employee Central, make sure the Employee Central data is quality. You launch the worksheets, go through the route map, you check out reports, and then you make changes to the worksheets. Don't just launch them and say, oh, look, everything works. But you go through the validations, make sure you test edge cases, because you don't want someone to suddenly find out that you can't send a form forward, which has actually happened, where someone put in a validation where it was impossible to send the form forward. And that meant all the worksheets need to be deleted and recreated with that fix made. So make sure you do a thorough job of testing all the changes you've made. Then you're going to migrate into production. That usually is just a factor of downloading it from one server and then uploading it into the second server. If you've got any questions about the migration process, this is something, again, we can help you with. Once you get it into production, you're going to be testing it. Again, you're going to make sure the planner hierarchy is correct. Typically, what you do is rather than launching forms using your existing route map, you make a separate route map that only has a single step in it to make sure no forms actually go to managers. You want to make sure that the email notification is removed. You remove the executive review permission to make sure that you can launch them in production, but only the right people are able to see things. We don't want emails being generated to all millions of people. Millions may be an exaggeration, but we don't want emails to be generated before planning is actually ready to start. Okay, once you've actually validated it in production, you actually want to make sure you do a purge of the worksheets, not just deleting the worksheets. It's a little known fact that actually the number of worksheets that exist for a particular template affect the speed of the executive review tool. So the more you have deleted worksheets for a particular template, the slower the executive review is going to work. But if you purge the worksheets, i.e. get rid of them completely, you're going to be able to have an optimal experience when using the executive review tool. So make sure you do a purge in production, because that's where you want the performance to be best. It's not so important in test, but again, you can do it in test, and again, it will optimize performance of the executive review. Okay, we want to then, you restore, after you've done your test, you're all ready to go, you restore your route map, and then you restore your permissions to the executive review, and then it's ready for go time. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we're going to actually go through a little bit of a refresher of what you need to do once you go live. So let's talk about now launching and running your campaign. Okay, this is sort of a little bit mini admin training where we're going to talk some of the admin tools that are available to you to make sure you understand, because it may have been a whole year ago that you actually did this. And it's like, oh gosh, what did I do? Did I remember to update worksheets? I can't remember what that was. So what we're going to do now is we're going to dive into the nuts and bolts of what's happening on the admin side of what you need to be able to do to run your compensation plan smoothly. Okay, launching the worksheets. Okay, I don't like the fact that the slide says launching worksheets in the title, and the first talks about creating worksheets is the next thing. So we actually do create worksheets. That's actually the name of that's actually launch worksheets is actually the name of the action. You can see there in the screenshot, launch the compensation worksheets. And this is where you do it typically once per year. It may be once per quarter for variable pay, but usually it's once per year. It's the same process for both compensation and variable pay. Of course, for reward and recognition, there is no template, so you don't need to actually worry about that. There are no worksheets. But for comp, variable pay, and total compensation, you go through this launch worksheets process. You go in there and you give it a name. The name may be pre-filled for you, depending upon your translations options that you've picked, because you may wanted a translated label each time. If it's all grayed out, then you don't need to worry about that. Step one. Step two, you set the plan dates. And customers always ask me, Phil, what are those dates actually for? And I'll tell you, really not a lot. Those dates set the time that you want for the actual process. So you think about that as when you launch a process, should be your start date. Your due date is your date which you want them all done. And then your end date should be your theoretically end of the process. But these just appear in visual. They actually don't ever really appear on the worksheet. They don't affect functionality. It's actually the start and end dates and due dates that is part of this route map that actually can affect the things like whether a form is automatically sent forward or not, or emails that are sent out reminding people that it's time to do. So these dates here, they're for display only. They don't affect functionality. But then the last thing is you want to make sure that you choose the right head of compensation planning. This theoretically should be the CEO. It's the top of the whole entire hierarchy. You don't need to be part of the review to be a planner of the process. So you actually, even if this is, let's say we're doing a smaller subset of the population in your salary review, maybe we're just going to do a certain country or certain region, you still select the CEO because they are the head of the entire hierarchy, and it will actually go through the process and it goes through the process of actually launching the worksheets and only launch them for the appropriate people, which the eligibility criteria should be the governing to make sure the right people are on the worksheets. There is the apply eligibility, and actually I realized I probably should mention that first. The eligibility rules need to be applied before you launch the worksheets. That's visible on a separate tab. So you make sure you go and apply the eligibility criteria, and that will make sure that the right people are on the worksheets. Okay. So once you've launched the worksheets, that means planners are go ahead and doing their work, but there are changes that happen during that time. It used to be clients were very concerned about freezing the system to make sure that there are no data changes or no ins and outs of employee hierarchy during the compensation process. But that's actually now a thing of the past. SuccessFactors has a robust set of tools to make sure that you have the right people on the right worksheets and the right data in the right worksheets. And it's important you understand the function of these tools and to make sure you don't shut down your system for 6 to 8 weeks. So we use these rules and we use the update worksheets process not only as a manual task that you can use to make sure that the data is being updated, but you also can use it as part of the automated background job, which I mentioned earlier. Typically, this automated job is running between 1 and 2 or 3 times a day. You usually don't need it more often than that, but you always can run it manually through the update worksheets process inside the compensation home. So what you would do is specifically, you want to do this and specifically pay attention to changes in eligibility. And that's what I've highlighted here in the screenshot. We make sure that if there are any changes to source data, so something changes in Employee Central, oh, well, Mary was supposed to be part of the compensation review. Why isn't she? Oh, that's because their data is incorrect in Employee Central. You make the correction in Employee Central, but you need to apply the eligibility rules again to make sure that that change is reflected upon the compensation worksheet. So it's very important that you understand the update process and what it means to you and what you need to do in order to get it done. Okay. The update worksheets does mass changes. It used to be that you could only do update on all worksheets at once. They added in the last few releases, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, the ability to update specific worksheets through the admin process. You don't get all of the tools, but you get most of them through that process, and that may be more targeted. It used to be you had to have a hammer to actually fix some of the problems. That's all you do is hit things with a big giant hammer. Now you've got some little more surgical tools to actually go in and be more precise. And speaking of surgical tools, we've got the add, move, and delete employees functionality. This is the real surgical work on there, where you actually go in and make individual changes to individual employees in specific worksheets. Sometimes it may be that you, while an employee currently reports to one person, so let's say I report to Martin, but I just moved on to Martin's team yesterday. So Martin really isn't the right person to judge what my salary should be. It should be my old manager. So rather than setting up an entire hierarchy just for Phil, Phil is moved using the move employee work functionality back to my old work manager, who actually does a better job of judging my contribution to the business. So he gives me, of course, a 30% raise. Martin would only give me a 3%. So I want Martin. So make sure you move people to the people who are giving them the best. Okay. Also, one thing it is, it may be that you need to reset a person and maybe reset a group of people. Now, before that meant having to delete worksheets and creating worksheets anew. You actually can, if you delete an individual and then re-add them, that actually is the same effect. So if a individual person needs to be reset, i.e. put back to their beginning state, with everything except which step they are on. So if you have an employee that's on a particular worksheet that needs to reset, you delete them, re-add them, and that would make them renew as if it was from scratch back on that original worksheet. Of course, any recommendations or comments would have been lost to that process, so make sure you take that into consideration when you do this, but it is possible to reset people. Okay. You also may need to route forms. Oftentimes we have you start, as in consultants, recommend that your very first step is a holding step where you're actually creating the forms. So HR can have a review of them before they are sent to managers or planners. Also, we have a holding step at the end where we recommend you do a review of the numbers. You get some sort of remuneration committee, maybe getting a sign off. You have to wait before you actually make the forms complete. So you're going to be using the route form or root form, depending upon where you live, function. And that would actually get you from allow you to move forms in mass from one step to another. You can do this through the managed forms interface that you get, or the My Forms interface that you get, but that limits you to 250 forms at a time. If you need to do all of them at once, this is the best way to use Route Form. The title of this slide is Delete Form or Manage Forms. So is where you go ahead and delete forms. This is only a method of last resort. You should only ever really be doing this on a test instance. You shouldn't be doing this on a production instance because this could be, it gets wipes out everything. It is possible to restore deleted forms, but really on production, you should really think hard and fast whether you actually need to do this. Again, as I mentioned before, if you do need to delete them on production, you then should purge them to make sure that the system works in its best way. Deleting them and re-adding them is a full system reset. Basically, that's essentially turning it off and turning it back on again. You start again from scratch. All comments, all entries, etc., will have been lost. There are situations where I've had clients had to do this. I remember one client back in my early days working at SAP forgot to put an exchange rate in. They forgot the exchange rate between the Uganda shilling and the euro, and everybody who was in Uganda actually was getting paid in the millions and millions of euros because the currency conversion defaults to 1. And so they didn't realize that for their small population. The only way they could fix that was by deleting all the worksheets and starting from scratch. It is possible to download all of your results using the executive review to upload them again after you've got the system back running. Again, let's try to avoid that. It's the last system of last resort. Okay, so now that's a whole lot of section of tools that you can do to actually run your compensation system cleanly. Now let's talk about reporting, because we've got all this data and we've collected it, and we know we can publish it back to Employee Central or export to payroll, but really we want to use compensation more than just a tool to actually update salaries. We want to be able to use it as a strategic tool to actually figure out how your business is running. And this is where reporting comes into it. There are a couple standard reports that come with compensation. One you might not think of as a report, but it's a tool you should be familiar with. But we also talk about the reporting landscape. Martin will come in for a little bit, talk about the reporting landscape. And then we'll talk about some reports that affected people have done that actually are of use. Okay. The first reporting tool that you've got use is what's called the executive review. And this is why I said you might not think of it as a report, but it is actually a report. It's a way of looking at the data separate from the workflow process. But there has been a really great innovation, and we'll talk about that when we get to the end, of ways that you can now use the executive review more as a decision-making tool and less of a report. So you've got the executive review, you can export it to Excel, you can modify it in Excel and upload it again. It's really great. Most clients, if you've used the system already once, you should be familiar with the executive review. But I'm not so sure many clients are familiar with the roll-up report. The roll-up report is listed on the worksheet as the detailed report. It is a great tool that allows managers or planners to use when they are thinking about approving or disallowing or rejecting a particular worksheet. So if I look on the roll-up report, you can see the top row shows Jeff Hill and his entire hierarchy. Jeff Hill is a manager of managers, so he needs to make a decision. Should I approve Ben Shervin's worksheet? Should I approve Jada Baker's worksheet? And this gives him a view, well, I can approve Ben because Jada's under budget. It's okay that Ben's over budget because Jada's under budget. That sort of thing. It happens to be in my screenshot that everybody's under budget by a significant margin, but we all know that's not usually the case. We need to make a judgment that the planners can have about whether it's okay from an aggregate point of view. And this is a great tool. So please be aware of the roll-up reports. Hey, Martin.
Yeah, I'm sure everyone does keep going under budget. I'm sure that's the case. And I would give you a little bit more than 3% as an increase.
Thank you.
Interest. So as some of you may be aware, SAP have announced some areas of the reporting tool set that will be deprecated in 2025. Customers should be aware of this, but if you are not, then please do contact us to discuss these dates and how we can assist you. We have run a webinar on this subject in January 2025, and you can go in and review that webinar, get the recording and the materials on our website. This is a great point for you to actually get more understanding of what is going on and find out a little bit more. Within Effective People, we have been helping many of our customers with the transition to SAP Story Reports. This can be from using some SAP standard stories that Phil mentioned, extending using the Effective People stories based on our customer feedback, and lastly, training key users at organizations to empower them to create their own. We have run those on a number of sessions recently after the last webinar, and we'll continue to do that as more customers go live. I think we had about 60% of our customers live. We've got a few more coming through who will be soon. If you want to know any more about these, then please do either reach out to us via the email you receive after this webinar, or raise a support query, or raise it with your account team after this call as well. Phil, back to yourself.
So I wanted to show you some of the examples of story reports, or as I call them, report stories. So I kind of go the reverse of what's the standard. We do have some reports that are Effective People have developed that are maybe useful. And these are things that can be basically just dropped into your environment, some small changes made, and actually you can start using them yourselves. This gives you a good outline of where you're going and how the flow is going. Give you as an admin to make sure that the compensation process is going smoothly. We have another one called the Insights Report that actually shows where you are as far as where you are now versus where you want to be. So basically, what is the impact of the review? So how have people's salary changes? Are we doing a better job with pay for performance, etc. But where the Insight Report and the next report comes into play is where we talk about gender equality. As you are all probably aware, that the European Union has set a target of June 2026 for its Gender Pay Transparency Directive, of which we are well aware here at Effective People. And we're developing a set of reports, you can see these here too, are two that show what is the current gender pay gap and how are we affecting that gap. Okay, we're also in the process of developing some other gender gap reports to address other parts of the directive. So if you are curious of how you can make yourself more prepared for answering these directives, make sure you reach out to contact us. Okay. We also have a good report that shows how we're affecting the pay for performance. Are we actually making sure the top performers are getting adequately awarded? This is, of course, important from when we talk about retention points of view. Okay. There have been a lot of system improvements over the last year. Some of these were mentioned in the last webinar on this topic, but I'm going to actually repeat some of those, unfortunately. So there have been a lot of enhancements to compensation statements. I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about the individual enhancements. Again, you'll get the slides later on. What I want to do is make sure you understand that compensation statement templates are, for a long time, customers use custom ones rather than using the standard editor due to limitations with the capabilities. SAP has taken a lot of steps to update and close those gaps. Really, you should be looking at using the standard compensation templates. One of the biggest areas where there was a gap was the inability to have multilingual statements. That was changed in one of the last releases to make sure, I think it was the release just before the last one. So make sure you are using that. If you've got multiple templates, one for each different language that you are maintaining right now, you no longer need to do that. So actually try to reduce it down to a single template, and you can use this functionality here. The editor has gotten a lot better. You can make things look a lot nicer. You're still kind of limited a bit on the layout, but you can actually do things a lot better. There are some functionality that allows you to bulk print, which you didn't have before. That's not a custom versus a standard. That's still just a general statement. but they've made it a lot prettier. But the biggest thing, and this is one of the things that was for the longest time, biggest pain for customers dealing with compensation statements, is if you use the editor, you had to recreate it from scratch in your production instance. And that was an awful experience. So luckily, in the last release, this actually wasn't scheduled to be for the H1 release of 2025. It was actually put into the H2 release of 2024, the ability to migrate statement editor templates from one instance to another. So it's possible to generate it and create it and test it on your dev system, and then just download it and upload it back into your production instance and retain the ability to edit your template. This is huge. So if you've been doing that admin process all this time, this luckily means that you no longer have to do it from instance to instance. Okay, the other tools I mentioned before, this came out in the last release, is the ability that your executive review permissions can be changed per route map step in the executive review. So you can make sure that you edit people only that are on a particular step of the route map. This is one of the things that I've been asking for a long time of SAP. And it is something that can really help move the executive review from a reporting piece to maybe more a piece that's more actively involved in the actual planning. This is optional. It does require a little bit of complicated setup. So if you are, again, confused on it, let us know and we can help you out. Okay, the latest version of the My Forms is there. It's a new interface for updating your forms. It's mentioned here because it is something that your screenshots and your training guides may need to be updated. Really, the same functionality is there. It's just easier to use. It is an option there. It's automatically on, but you actually can disable it if you want to. It seems like a very not easy, straightforward change. It seems like it's very technical, that we now need new and enhanced application-specific rule scenarios. This is relevant when it comes to eligibility rules for compensation. If in the past you created basic rules for eligibility, you can no longer create basic rules, which means that you need now to create specific compensation eligibility rules that actually limit you as to what your base objects are. And so there are some changes to when you create new rules, you actually do need to maybe approach them a little bit differently. You can no longer create job information as a base object. You actually can only use employee details. So you now need to, when you reference the rule, you might need to go to a little level of indirection to actually get the rule to work for you. Okay. Now, if we look at what's coming in 2025, the people profile, you may be aware that the entire people profile of Employee Central is being redesigned. Specifically, they want to address the compensation piece, where they're going to start including benefits to give you a better idea of what total remuneration is and total rewards is for your employee. So benefits are going to be available on the people profile. The advanced filters in the executive review, they were limited to just the executive review, but they're coming to the worksheet in next release. Reward and recognition, and one of the big reasons people didn't use reward and recognition was the ability to, you had to upload budgets. You will now be able to calculate budgets, which is a huge change. Again, reconsider whether reward and recognition is right for you. Also, in the H2 release, this should say 2H release instead of 1H. There are other changes. We're going to be able to get multiple sources for different statements. You'll be able to pull data onto the statements from EC or MDF objects directly rather than including things just on the worksheet. Or conditions, a way of getting compensation to work like EC when it talks about comp ratio calculations. And there's going to be a new UI through the rewards and recognition. So that's the end. Race through the end there, and now questions. So
okay, Phil. So I haven't. We've had one question in that which I will repeat, and I'll just give you our answer, but you may have a further comment. If we don't have the sales incentive module, but have compensation and performance management, goals management module, can we still work on incentive calculations within the existing module? I basically answered that it really depends on the complexity of the incentive program and how often it is run. There is a possibility that running in a comp and variable pay, but we need to review in more detail. But I don't know if you've got any further comments on that.
Yeah, one of the differentiators is to determine, is the incentive program awarded at the close of an individual event? So, i.e., I sold this deal, and so the next month I'm expecting a big commission check. Or is it based upon quarterly achievements or annual achievements against individual sales incentives? So did I meet my quota for the year? If I met my quota for the year and we're looking at all our salespeople at the same time, then variable pay is probably the tool for you. If it's more of a one-off, then that's a sales incentive program. So it's really about scope. If you're doing a regular mass review of incentives, then variable pay is probably the tool that you can use.
Okay. There's one or two questions that have just come in. I'll just go through that unless anybody else has got any others. In terms of variable pay, what is the earnings table used for? Well,
the earnings table is a underlooked aspect of variable pay, underused, sorry. It is when you've got a bonus scenario that's based upon actual earnings and not theoretical earnings that is stored in Employee Central. We've got clients that bonus, for example, on overtime. So if you go off of Employee Central, the overtime that a person recorded would not actually be determined as part of the bonusable amount. So we would then use the earnings table to say this is exactly how much they earned versus how much Employee Central says they should have earned. So it's the difference between those two. It's basically a amount from the payroll team that actually says for these employees we want a bonus, instead of bonusing off of the 100,000 pounds they say that Employee Central says they get annually, we want a bonus off the 105,000 that they actually earned. And so it's when you want to bonus on a percentage of the actual amount earned rather than the theoretical actual amount earned, the theoretical amount earned that Employee Central says. So that's what the earnings table is for. It can be a little bit complex to set up, and the data is not always easy to maintain or obtain, I should say, because it doesn't come straight from payroll. But if you've got an environment where you need to bonus upon actual earnings versus what it says in Employee Central, then the earnings table is probably the solution for you.
Fine. Okay. Thank you for that. And one last question. I think we've just about got time. What mistakes do customers make most often? I'm not sure.
Well, there basically are two areas I'd say that customers make most often mistakes. Number one is they are not fully aware of what their business requirements are ahead of time. So they may not be regular there might not be regular communication between the rewards team and the admin team setting up this. So I often find at the last minute there's some new requirement that has come up that we didn't realize that needs to be part of the process. And so if we look back at that process where it's like 1, 2, 3, 4, that 2 step is what I'm talking about here. Make sure you know what you need to do. So that's the first mistake, is not being really aware of all the requirements. And then also telling the reward team, no, it's too late. We can't do that. But the other mistake that clients make is they don't test enough. Testing is almost always one of those things that gets pushed to the very end. But it is an important part of the process. And adequate testing will save many a face when it comes down to actually doing the actual process.
Testing.
Testing. And once you've tested, test again.
Yeah. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions coming in. So I'll give it. Yeah. I'll say thank you for your time today. Thank you, Phil, for imparting your knowledge in this area. I hope you've got a few things from Phil's update and don't need to use the big hammer he referenced. If you do have any questions, then please do contact us via your account manager, support ticket, or reply to the content email that we will send after this call. Thank you for your time. And again, Phil, thank you very much for your time as well.
Thank you for joining. We hope you found this video insightful and inspiring. If you're ready to take your workforce to the next level, visit our website for more valuable resources and solutions.